Yeah, it's like super dynamite stuff. It's really pretty amazing.
And what's it for?
I don't know yet.
All right, we are live. How's it going?
Good. How are you, David?
Good. Yeah. So what is on the docket for today? I have a bunch of things in my mind, but I'd be curious to hear what you what's alive in you right now in terms of what's going on. What's alive in you?
Well, today I'm really interested in having this conversation about plant communication. And you've been all over the world and worked with lots of traditional healers, and so I was really interested in what your, how should I say it, like what your take on it is, and how different people around the world, different herbal healers around the world, are connecting with plants.
Plant communication. I don't know. I have the way that I kind of do it. I'm sort of stumbling in the dark, Years ago, my Hawaiian teachers would listen to plants, And my take on that is that I always prefer to listen rather than talk to them, Just because I have something to learn. When I first started listening, the first plant I ever listened to was glycine white-eye, which is related to soybeans. It's that, up in Canayo, it's that invasive glycine. And the first time,
It's all over the place.
Yeah, it's very invasive. It's kind of like kudzu for Hawaii, for Maui. And the first time I did that, I sat down and I just cleared my mind, and I just sat with the plant and I just listened. I listened with my body, And the what I got from that session was this three thing. And the question I asked was, what's the best way for me to listen to plants? That was what I asked that plant. And sort of through a convoluted whatever, I sat with it for about 45 minutes, probably a little more like an hour. And it took me at least a half an hour to shut my brain down, But I had watched my Hawaiian teachers listen to plants, and I was just using my body as an antenna. And the three pieces that I got was that after the response to that question was patience, humility, and respect. Those were the three things that I needed to embody in order to be able to hear plants clearly. Patience, in that it's not an easy process, and yeah, it just can take a long time, and it's it's challenging. It's challenging to get rid of my thinking mind and just really listen to my body without having my roof brain chatter get in the way, my stories or my projections and stuff. Humility, in that I have something to learn from this creature. That there's, we think that we're on the top of the evolutionary food chain, but we're not. We're just one tiny strand on a web. It's not a hierarchy in the sense of we're on top and everything else is below. That's sort of a white man's burden thing. It's more like an interconnectedness. And respect in the sense that I've got something to learn from this thing that most Western science thinks is dumb and stupid. It's this dumb molecular cascade, but just that. And so respect in that I need to honor plants when I'm taking them and when I'm using them, taking their lives and stuff. So that was kind of my experience with it. And I, for years, I tried to communicate that to people, but I didn't. And
it seems like magic. And it also seems that some people can develop that relationship and set aside the thinking and can do it, and other people really can't make that relationship. So like when you talk to other kind of plant healers or people who use plant medicines in different ways, Do you find that most of them have those qualities?
No, no. And for me, it's really important to discern between like my roof brain chatter. Like you know, I don't hear voices. I don't see fairies, any of that stuff. I'm noticing things with my body, which I think is built into us as mammals. You know, wild animals very rarely will eat poisonous plants. They know instinctively not to eat things, and wild animals will also use plants as medicine. They've proven that over and over again. You know, all sorts of primates and dogs and
Mhm.
cats and all sorts of creatures will use plants as medicine. But for me, the most important thing is not letting my imagination get in the way. Like
Mhm.
not letting my so what I do when I listen is I set aside a period of time. I'm physically comfortable. I'm with a plant that is in the ground and alive. If I know the plant, I may eat some of it, um, or smell it. But if I don't know it, I won't do that. Or I'll smell it, but I won't eat it. But and then I just stay present. And anything that comes up, I don't write anything down because the minute I start writing, it uses a different part of my nervous system. You know, so I just
Mhm.
sit there and I just stay present. I just watch what happens in my body. And so I use plants differently than even Hawaiian plants than most people I know because I've developed a relationship with certain plants, and I got a hit on them, and that so what I'll do is I'll sit there for hour and a half, and I'll just listen with my body. Don't write anything down, and then when it's over, when I'm done, I go back and I write down everything I can remember, and I don't filter it. I allow anything in to come in, whatever. So I could be thinking about politics or my taxes or a girlfriend or whatever, but everything comes in. Elmer Fudd, you know, whatever, everything comes in, and I acknowledge it. Then I go back to listening to my body, and I find that I'll get and things that aren't roof brain chatter feel different in my body. I'll even do the same thing with a patient. Sometimes I'll be holding a patient's head and I'll just be relaxing. And all of a sudden I'll get a hit of a plant like that. Like, oh, out of nowhere. And there's no preceding thought. And it
Mhm.
feels different in my body that if I'm thinking this and why I wonder if this is this, you know, there's no cascade of sequential thoughts. It's just like it comes in sideways. So anyway, that's how I've kind of done it. And it's the same way when I'm gathering plants for a patient. I'll have in mind what I want to get for a patient when I go out, but then I totally let it go and I let my body
Mhm.
decide. So I'll be moving and I'll be doing the practices, you know, hakalau and hakaheli and all that. And all of a sudden I will just turn and I'll be standing in front of a plant and I'll go like, really? Because this is for a specific patient. Like, really? This is what I'm supposed to do? And, you know, it's never happened, but if I stood in front of a poisonous plant, I wouldn't give that to a patient. You know, I know what the plant is, but sometimes
Mhm.
it shocks me. Like,
Mhm.
really, for that patient? And okay. And then
Mhm.
that goes into their
Mhm.
formula, you know.
Mhm.
But I mean, I've
Mhm.
done all my due diligence beforehand. I'm not just using a pendulum to decide which drug to give somebody, you know. I know the plants, I know
Mhm.
the boundaries, the parameters which I can safely work, and I do that. So
Yeah, and I think that's the responsible way to work. You know, having as much of the technical sort of knowledge and background, you know, the toxicology, those kinds of things, and coupling all of that with the intuitive sense, like with a well-developed intuitive sense, because you know you can't just give somebody trial and error. Oh, I'm going to give you 10 different plants to try out,
see what happens,
right?
right?
Because
Oops.
it obviously won't work.
Right.
Right? It would take maybe like a year to try out 10 different plants effectively for someone. And in that time, you may have actually created lots of, you know, side effects and things like that.
Yeah, and there's also the thing about
So,
knowing, you know, organoleptics, like knowing when something lands in your body, that's a very pre-verbal thing, precognitive. It's like
Mm,
somatic.
mhm.
So yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, and I think, to me it makes sense. To me, it makes sense evolutionarily that we would develop these capacities. If it makes sense to me evolutionarily that we would develop almost anything that gives us an edge in terms of survival.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
certainly there are other ways of knowing that outside of Western science that have been practiced for thousands of years and been practiced successfully.
And just think about pheromones. There's so much that's undiscovered about when even humans, who are whatever we are, the pheromones in our interactions, our reproductive interactions, are pheromones have a measurable effect that we had no idea about. Even
That's right.
the tone of voice, and when women are ovulating, their voice goes up, and they've shown
Mm-hmm.
that men are more attracted to that, or facial symmetry. It's all this stuff that's totally subliminal. Women are attracted to men that are like the optimal the optimal reproductive strategy apparently is third cousins, you know, and they've shown that in humans and in animals and stuff, that the third cousins is where you get the optimal, like, if we're too closely related, we get weirdness. And if we're not related enough, we get weirdness, we get like mutations
Mm-hmm.
that don't work, or it's not as powerful as third cousins. So it's kind of that balance
Mm-hmm.
point between incest and totally different genes.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, and the idea that like those pheromones are happening in parts per billion in the
Right, right,
atmosphere,
right.
right? And so there's always this kind of debate about homeopathics, and a lot of those things we're getting some of these very powerful but subtle messages in kind of homeopathic dosages,
That's a really
right?
good point. I hadn't
Uh,
thought of that. Yeah. Although to get an effect,
and that's in some
wouldn't
some
actually,
homeopathics I've taken. What's that?
well, it's not actually not homeopathic because you've shown that there are molecules there. Avogadro's number. If you get to, some homeopathics have nothing in there or whatever. Yeah, yeah.
Right, right. So they say, right? Yeah, and I imagine that's probably why some homeopathics are actually more successful than others. But I mean, it's the idea that maybe there's something to this, and maybe there is some sort of mechanism that we just really don't understand, or we don't have fine enough tools
Yeah.
to be able to measure it.
I'm sure there's thousands of them that are at play right now that we don't understand, that are going to be.
Yeah, and especially with the pheromones, because especially with the pheromones, it takes so many. There's such complicated molecules, right? It takes so many enzymes to be coded by the DNA in order to create those pheromones. There has to be a lot of intention from the plant
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of being able to create those very specific pathways.
And the way, one of the ways they speculate that the nervous system accepts those is if you get there's like an if-then clause in the receptor cell. So if you've got like
Mm.
1,000 receptors and you have less than 500 of them are receiving that molecule, then if that happens, then don't do anything. But if you get over that tipping point, over the 500, over the 50% or whatever, this is an example, then you get a physiological response. Also with kin recognition, right? Like, because plants and animals have kin recognition, and it's genetic. They can say, oh,
Mm.
I would gladly give my life for 2 siblings or 8 cousins. Like the closer I am,
Mm.
typically the more I tend to bond and all that stuff. And that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, and then this practice of Hakalau and Hakahele, can you say more about those?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've got also all kinds of speculations about how it works. So it's using peripheral vision um, to gather data. They've done studies that our foveal vision, we see color with our foveal vision But with peripheral vision, it's black and white, and we see context. So and when we bring our awareness to our peripheral vision, apparently it changes the way our nervous system works, and I believe it allows us to gather more data.
That's very interesting.
And they've even done things where if they block out peripheral vision when somebody's looking at an image, they don't get the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So you know how our hardware is repurposed, right? So the part of our brain that smells rotting meat is the same part that's disgusted with people, or the part of our brain that's hungry for food is also the same part that's hungry for knowledge. You know. So I think that what's happened is when we somehow our ability, and I'm guessing this is total speculation, our ability to see the big picture in life would be correlated to being able to widen our vision, you know. Like, it's a neuro hack. So hakalau and hakahele are just ways of moving. Like in the Hawaiians called it hakalau, like a widening means breath of the leaf. And the like Native Americans called it owl eyes, which is moving in a way. And you know, my experience is that when I'm walking and I'm gathering, I want to keep my head level. I don't want to bounce because that disturbs me. So I want to keep my head level when I'm moving. And then I bring my attention here. And yeah, we've even done that with couples where you bring your attention to peripheral vision when you're looking at your partner. And my experience is we get different kinds of information that way.
Yeah, no, it really is something, because I mean, even from an artistic point of view, you know, you have this idea of we focus a lot on the point in the periphery. So we're dealing with the object and its context. And you know, when you take a photograph, you know, 5 people taking a photograph of the same scene, they're going to end up looking quite different because where they pick the center and where they pick the periphery. And you know, I really wonder if, you know, we talk about mirror neurons, right? And that if I'm doing an activity or if I'm watching somebody else do that same activity, it actually ends up firing off the same neurons.
Right.
And you know, and I wonder if from a kind of mechanistic point of view, if when we're working with these plants and, you know, we feel them in our body. I was working with a Siberian blackberry, and it does something really interesting where the canes will arch down into the ground, and they'll kind of hover close to the ground, and you'll see that they'll start to develop roots.
Area roots.
From this point, because they want to kind of move into a better position and replant themselves, right? And it's very animalistic in that way, kind of like a mangrove. And so I'm really interested in what those compounds that are being created. Obviously, there are you know, hormonal compounds that are telling it to create roots there. You know, probably like gibberellic acid or something. But I'm willing to bet, just because we understand that there's this connection between the plant root and neurons in the brain, that there might be some kind of chemical that's specifically produced by those roots that might be neurogenerative.
Oh, that's interesting. And yeah, well, that's fascinating.
You know, and so when I was working with the plant, you know, when I was working with the plant, you know, I kind of go through the same process where there's a sense of reverence, first of all, a sense of finding my own inner quietude, which I work with the solar plexus quite a lot in finding equanimity in that, and really just creating myself as the empty vessel, and then I sort of project myself into the plant. And when I do that, I it's a real weird kind of twist, because I put myself into the plant, and then the plant finds itself in me. And so I start to feel, feel what that plant is kind of in my own body.
Yeah.
And when I was blackberry, because they're an invasive species, they're all over the place.
I think it's
I
Himalayan,
really
huh?
felt in my Himalayan, okay,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's Himalayan
um,
blackberry.
and and so I felt this in my spine, like this very tonic effect in my spine,
Hmm.
and I could feel, kind of that astringency that that you get with tonics,
Yeah.
and it was very kind of, very upright. And then when I went to go and I took a small amount of the stem, and I don't recommend chewing on things randomly, because we've all kind of gotten bit in the ass by that. But I felt it was relatively safe, and so I took a bit of the stem, and sure enough, it had that astringent quality to it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I imagine in the thorns, there's probably even more, because the thorns are usually kind of a transformed leaf that's been very contracted, um,
Right.
and so I'm sort of like, so I'm looking at it to that, and then it just obviously takes time. It's not kind of immediate that somebody's going to like just look at a plant, and sometimes we get hits that we know something is there, but it also, just being willing to invest the time, I think, is another really important aspect.
Yeah. I wonder about, if it's close to the ground, how does it know it's close to the ground? Because it doesn't have
Yeah,
the area roots until, how does it know? I mean, what is that sensing mechanism?
yeah, exactly. No, it's a really good question, and I'm guessing that it's probably pheromonally based.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I'm guessing that it's pheromonally based. Like maybe it's sensing fungus in the ground. Maybe it's even the fact that when it's upright, the apical meristems, that's the very
Oh,
shoots of the
right.
plant,
It's away from the sun.
are
Right, right.
are
Yeah,
auxin. They're
yeah.
producing auxin, but then maybe when they sort of tip down,
Right.
then the gibberellic acid is going into and collecting just based on its shape. So they're all kind of possibilities, and maybe they're all
Right.
happening.
Or the angle of the sun, or something like that. Yeah, interesting.
Something, yeah. So
So
those
you were
are so,
talking
and I
about,
think that's,
oh, I'm sorry,
yeah.
go on.
Go ahead.
Well, you were talking
Oh, but
about,
I was just going to say, I think that's where our intuition can really also guide us in these questions, right? Like I think science, Western science, really sees things such as intuition as woo, and disregards the kind of the power of it and the inner life that's possible through these things. And actually, a lot of really amazing scientific discoveries have been discovered based on someone's kind of spiritual experience like that.
right, like Descartes and Francis Crick and all kinds of stuff.
But yeah,
What was
exactly.
the guy
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
benzene ring, Ouroboros?
The That was give me a second. Kekule.
Yeah,
Kekule had a dream
right.
and he discovered how the benzene molecule, which is the kind of the core of all organic chemistry, was arranged, right? Because of a dream. Or Leo Szilard discovered or he had this insight about the nuclear reaction that led to atomic bombs while he was walking across the London street corner, and it just hit him like a ton of bricks. And Einstein didn't believe him that
It
it was
wasn't a dream. It was
possible.
it was a vision.
When he called him, what's that?
It
It was
wasn't
a
a dream. It
vision.
was a vision. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes, it was a vision. Yeah, like a waking vision, right?
yeah.
And so I think, in most traditional cultures, people who are working with plants use things like visionary states, hypnagogic states, dream states, all to work with these plants in a different way.
And the mysteries. Yeah. Talk a little bit about Descartes and how Descartes came about. The irony of Descartesian thinking.
Yeah. This whole thing of Descartes developing the scientific method, and I think it's really interesting. And I think it's important that when we're talking about culturally, when we're talking about science and its role in our lives, to actually have some sense of the history of science too.
Yeah.
And there are a lot. Humanity did amazing things pre-scientifically. And everything pretty much before Descartes developed the scientific method, he was around, I think, in the late 1500s, early 1600s, we call pre-scientific. But he asked this question of, how do I know that a demon isn't whispering into my ear and giving me false information by
he was
what
a
I
theologian
observed?
too. He was a theologian. So
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, he was a religious man and was trying to differentiate whether angels or demons were talking to him.
Yeah, basically. And so then he developed this like relatively elegant method for proving something, right? And it's actually really opened the door to a lot of amazing invention and innovation and things like this. However, we can't kind of underestimate the shadow of it, that it actually is very good at analysis, but not very good at synthesizing and integrating information. And so we know lots of bits and pieces of the 20th century through various methods. But what we don't really have is a really solid way that we're integrating as a society all of this knowledge and saying, oh, there's a new way to look at the world based on what we've discovered. And that's something that we really need, because we have to develop. We need to act quickly. We can't wait around for trial and error to sort of heal the environmental damage that this kind of broken up way of looking at things has actually caused.
We can call it a unified meme theory. We're looking for the unified meme theory.
Something like that. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about neurogenesis a bit, and run this by you. We haven't talked about this before, but I lost my sense of smell years ago. I have anosmia, and I don't know when.
This is an issue that a lot of people from COVID are experiencing now.
Right. And I'm not sure when it happened. I'm not sure whether it was 10 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago, but at some point I lost my sense of smell. And I also used to make stained glass windows for a living, and there was a lot of flux and solder, or flux that went into my, acid that went into my sinuses. So I could have lost it that way, but it's also correlated to dementia and Alzheimer's. There's also other things in my past that are also correlated to dementia and Alzheimer's, although none of them are genetic. I don't have the ApoE4 gene or anything, so that's good. But I've been aware of this. So a lot of the supplementation that I do is based on, neurocognition and stuff. So recently, I know there was a study with sound and light at 40 hertz. Did we talk about that before for Alzheimer's?
No.
Yeah, there's it's 40 hertz sound, at least in my mouse studies. 40 hertz in a sound wave and 40 hertz in a light wave will apparently gets rid of beta amyloid plaques and creates neurogenesis, right? So at night I've been playing this 40 hertz noise, which is not very pleasant, but most of the night I'll play it, And I've just been experimenting, doing what I can to make sure I stay sharp. And for the last week, when I've been exercising up in cool, I've been walking up the hills. I noticed that my sense of smell is starting to come back.
Really?
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. And now I have no idea if this sound has anything to do with it or not, but There's two places in the brain where neurogenesis happens. One is in the
Mhm.
hippocampus, which is about consolidating memory.
Uh,
Yeah, and the other one is in the olfactory center in the brain, the center for smell. So I'm thinking I would like to, you and I have been talking for the last week or two about plants that increase are neuroprotective or increase neurogenesis and the way we can
mm,
deliver that. I think in the
mhm.
next couple of weeks, I'd like to like amp that up. We talked about the Scutellaria and stuff,
Yeah,
but also very interesting. I have a friend, one of our instructors has glioblastoma. I think we talked about that, huh?
yeah.
And I was
Can
doing
you
some
say a little bit more about what that actually is?
glioblastoma. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a brain cancer. It's a very aggressive brain cancer. And his name is Ethan Sisser, and he's going to be teaching a class for us called 5 Seconds of Surrender. Um, so I've been talking with him and working with him, and I was doing some research on glioblastoma, and apparently there's an enzyme in the brain called CDK5 that when they give people with glioblastoma a drug with a CDK5, apparently it helps. So I started looking at the plants that influence CDK5, and they're the same plants we've been talking about.
Is that right?
A lot of them are the same, yeah. I mean, like the Scutellaria, the Withania, the licorice also, you know,
Mm,
and
mm.
even epimedium, which apparently passes the blood-brain barrier, gets in there.
Blood-brain barrier.
Yeah. So I'd like to work with you on that and this week,
Wow,
next week, and
receptor.
see if we can get
Yeah,
some. It's the same herbs that are neuroregenerative and stuff. Maybe as a nozzle oil, or maybe as a nebulizer, to see. And I'll be the guinea pig,
yeah,
and see if
yeah. No, that's
yeah.
that's great. Yeah, and I've been I've decided to focus a little bit more on receptors than I have in the past. So a lot of that is kind of getting deeper into it. Everybody kind of knows the basics, but we've just discovered we've been doing so much more neurological research in the last 10 years that there's just so much information out there, which is really exciting. And once we understand, a lot of times the amino acids that a lot of these alkaloids are synthesized from, are biosynthesized from, usually those have a certain relationship already with those receptors, like serotonin and a lot of the psychedelic compounds that are kind of evolved from serotonin or biosynthesized from serotonin. That's why they react on the reactors that they do. So it'll be interesting to look at the molecular structure of some of the major compounds that we're working with, or talking about working with, or the compounds that are present in the plants that we're talking about working with, and look at what amino acids are interacting with that receptor, and see where the commonalities are. I'd be willing to bet that they're similar if they're working on those receptors.
Well, it was interesting too because one of the things I came across was harmaline apparently also inhibits that enzyme. So I don't know what that means, but
It inhibits the enzyme. Okay. Yeah, instead of that, because that harmaline is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and that's one of the things that they're one of the main components in the ayahuasca tea
right,
that
right.
the New York Post just found was potentially useful for treating Alzheimer's.
And those are neuroregenerative.
Yes, and the dimethyltryptamines, they're saying that the like psilocybin was just was supposedly approved by FDA for treatment of depression. So there's now a big race to be able to produce psilocybin in a broth format. They just elucidated some of the enzymes. There's four main enzymes that'll turn it from basically from the precursor compound to that chemical industrially to grow it for medicine, which is a big debate in and of itself.
Right.
So that'll, and they say a lot of these things create neuroplasticity, or they found that a lot of these compounds create neuroplasticity. Yeah. Which, as we grow older, of course, we get less and less neuroplasticity, and maybe a reason why, as we get older, we get more fixed in our ideas.
Yeah.
And so having a fresh and youthful mind is really quite important.
We were talking the other day about I was just looking at this too. We were talking about the relevance of serotonin in the biosphere and the uses,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Stephen Buhner talks about this idea that, and I'm not sure where I've gotten the rest of it, but I think it's really interesting. It's a theory that serotonin is in the biosphere. It's been in the biosphere like forever, millions, hundreds of millions of years. And the joke is that, well, and so have, DMT and psilocybin and stuff. Mm-hmm. And the joke is that Gaia didn't make it waiting for hippies to show up to eat mushrooms. It has
right.
things have functions in the biosphere. So the idea is that somewhere along the evolutionary line, Gaia came up with serotonin and went, oh, this is cool. And then just kept spreading it because it was so applicable, And then, of course, DMT, psilocybin, and mescaline all fit into that receptor, that serotonin receptor.
That's right.
So the theory is that the serotonin is used in the biosphere when things are stable, when the environment is reasonably stable, and
within us it brings alertness. It brings an alertness, which also kind of leads to communication and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and then when there's an environmental impact, you got like punctuated equilibrium, the Stephen Foster thing, where you've got this, not Stephen Foster, what's his name? Anyway, the evolutionary theorist.
Peter?
Huh?
Never mind.
Oh, it's called punctuated equilibrium. It was a different theory of evolution, that evolution moves and jumps and starts. So the idea is that serotonin's there when things are chill, but when there's environmental upheaval, the psilocybin and DMT kick in, and then the biosphere starts generating, starts methylating like crazy and changing the patterns and stuff to find a solution to the problem. So that, so you've got a drought. All of a sudden there's a drought. Okay, we have to figure out how to handle this drought. So plants, they don't run away or change their environment. They rotate their genes. And the speculation is maybe that those psychedelics in the biosphere promote evolution.
Yeah, and I think there's, we talk about, sometimes we get down on personification as being kind of, anthropocentric, right?
Anthropocentrism,
but and the kind of argument against anthropocentrism, obviously that can go very wrong, but the argument against anthropocentrism also has this kind of shadow of this idea that we're implicitly separate from nature, that we can't actually connect with nature, that any sort of projection that we make on maybe how a tree feels or something like that is really just a projection. But I would counter that with the fact that, or the theory that we all come from a common ancestor, and that in looking at this kind of more scientific approach to as above, so below, the alchemical aphorism, that there are real connections in kind of like chemistry and anatomy between us and plants and animals and insects, that yes, a plant might not experience emotion in the same way that we do, but there may be some element to it that it does experience in common with us in reaction to certain things, and that there may be a way other ways of knowing, intuitive faculties that we can have as in terms of ways of knowing that we can really connect with these things. And I think it's that connection that we kind of need to somehow reignite, but if we can do it with a real sense of, looking at the science behind it, and then integrating all that in, as well as our intuition, we may have a really powerful tool for understanding
Yeah,
these
and being
things.
willing to speculate, it's fine. Maybe I'm wrong, and I don't have to be right. But
Yeah,
but who
absolutely.
knows, maybe those molecules have nothing to do with evolution, but it's certainly interesting and it's worth exploring. And I don't want to look at the world through this tiny peephole, like only
Yeah.
what the FDA or the AMA or the official, corporate psychopathy is saying is true. There's so many other ways of being human.
So many other ways of being human, absolutely.
That
Yeah, and
are
when we're
valuable.
talking about things like, something like the DMT in the environment, or in terms of communication and things like that, or psilocybin. I mean, these molecules are very close to their amino acid precursors. It only takes a few steps and a few enzymes to actually create these things.
Right.
So to me, that tells me it's a pretty basic and ubiquitous compound. And when we're looking at the relationship of trees and fungi in the environment, there are probably these, understanding that the fungi act as a kind of information superhighway for the tree system and the plant system, and how they connect and share nutrients and provide help provide water for one another through all these fungal networks. Having those elements as part of the communication may actually be really, really important. It also, the idea that in the rhizosphere, that the root tips of trees they found are actually neural cells.
Yeah.
That
Darwin
if those,
speculated about that. Darwin speculated that the root tip was the brain, and that was a long
yeah,
time ago. Yeah.
right, and he may not have even been considering the interaction of all those different species, right? Because the cooperative interaction of all those species.
So what I love about this is it allows us to not only integrate a better view, what I consider a better view of the world, but it because we're in a huge shadow right now, politically and scientifically and environmentally. We're in an immense shadow.
Mhm.
And if we can't find a way to create,
Emotionally too.
and what?
Emotionally too.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, all of America really kind of needs to be doing its inner work.
Right.
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. And really, if you think about, Descartes wasn't against, in the creation of the scientific method, wasn't against spirituality in a sense.
Right.
And it's a loaded word. Obviously, it gets thrown around a lot. I think we can think of it as in a lot of different ways, and one of it is we can really just think about it as the dynamics of how everything is working, right? But there's a point when even when we talk about anytime you read a neuroscience article or research study, it starts out very mechanistically, and that at some point it shifts into talking about consciousness, right? And they don't really acknowledge that there's this, there's a big leap there, right? There's actually a huge leap between these mechanisms and then what we actually experience as, conscious beings. So I think that what the scientific method will kind of eventually prove is that there is actually something greater going on than just the pieces and parts. That we will at some point, as our methods get better and our visualization methods get better, start seeing the cathedral not for the bricks.
Right,
or
exactly.
I should say, not
Exactly. Yeah.
mistaking the cathedral for the bricks, right?
And I don't even have to wait for that to happen. I'm jumping in already. I'm looking for patterns that are not, that are not.
I'm convinced. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been great, Brian. Any final thoughts about this? This is interesting stuff.
Yeah, I just, I just encourage anyone with questions that they would like us to be looking into or discussing, shoot them by us. We have our own ideas about things, and it's always interested to hear what the community is interested as well.
Yeah, it's like they say, half of what I know is wrong, but I don't know which half, so I just say it all. You know. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
I will leave our contact information at the end of this video. And thanks for coming, man. Good talking to you.